So you're good to go.
We are good to get started.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's see if we can connect with.
Really quick before you get started, I want everybody to check the chat, and I put the packet that we will be following along with today that Jared sent me. So if I need to resend it one more time, I can, but it should be in the chat.
Okay. Okay, so if you have done this before, we'll have some keywords throughout the class that you'll have to write down to do the online credit. And Tony, there's a link for them to fill out that form.
I can put the form in the chat when we're done, yes.
Okay, perfect. So I think there's 5 of them for this one, so just write those down and plug them in when we get to the end. Okay, my name is Jared Fenn. I'm with Pillar to Post. We're going to be doing a 1-hour core credit on Radon. This is kind of awkward because I see everybody there. I'm not sure where to look, so.
You know, mind hogging the attention.
Yeah, and Connor is the only one here in person, so a little one-on-one.
Only child syndrome. I'm used to it. Good.
So the class we're talking about is Radon. A little bit about Pillar to Post. If you're not familiar with Pillar to Post, we have offices all over North America. It's the largest home inspection company in North America. In Utah, we have an office down in Cedar City that covers all of southwestern Utah. I'm over this whole central area, so mostly Utah County, but we'll go down to Fairview, Mount Pleasant, south that way. And then north, we've got a Salt Lake office, Park City, one up in northern Utah. So we've got some of the benefits is we can get you covered wherever we are in the state, but we also have that network. So instead of just Bob's inspection where you get Bob and his expertise, we're constantly texting each other and interacting and hey, have you ever seen this? I've been doing this since 2006. I've seen a lot of houses, but still, we have had 2 things last week where it was just like, wow, I've never run into that before. What do we do about that? So there's always new stuff. I'm sure those of you that have been in real estate for a long time, you'll see things all the time that'll be like, whoa, that's a new one for me. So that helps out a lot. As far as our inspections, some of the differences, we do complete and print our reports on site. We also do a full 360 tour to make it a little bit more interactive, especially with COVID and all of the things. Luckily, things are loosening up a little bit. More people can go to the houses, but still, if clients can't come to the inspection, we have that full interaction that we can do with them. Okay, this is awkward with my pointer. Let's get started on the class. Today we're going to talk about radon. It is something that if you've been doing real estate for a while, when I first started doing real estate, it was kind of an issue. My first couple of years, I would sub out any radon tests that we would do, just there wasn't that many. And now about 35 to 40% of our inspections include a radon test. So more and more people are aware of it. And it seems like every time one of the news have some sort of article or some broadcast on radon, all of a sudden it'll go up to about 60% of our inspections will have radon. We'll get a lot of homeowners that will call and want radon tests. So there's more education, more awareness. We're going to learn a little bit more about what it is. We're going to talk about some of the myths because I hear those a lot. Just, there's a lot of information out there, and I'll try to be as unbiased and kind of give you both perspectives as much as I can. Really just understanding what is radon, what are the health hazards, and how it can affect your health, and how you need to be aware of it for your real estate transactions and to help your clients. Okay, this is trying to look at two different places so I can see what we're doing. Let's try this. Okay, so first, what is radon? Radon is a radioactive gas, comes out of the ground, it's naturally occurring. All of you are probably breathing radon to a small degree right now. So it's everywhere. You're always going to be running into it. Comes out of the ground, it's naturally occurring from uranium. So as uranium breaks down, and there's trace amounts of uranium all over the planet, as that breaks down, it releases the radon, and that radon is in the ground. It tries to escape to the atmosphere, so it's always trying to get out. They've come up with some just rule of thumb, or just to put it in perspective, because we think, well, uranium, what's the likelihood that I have uranium in my backyard? Well, actually, for any place on the planet, if you were to take a dump truck of soil, you'd have about a half a teaspoon of uranium. That's just kind of an average. Obviously, it's in higher concentrations, and that's where they start mining it. And we actually have places in Utah where uranium is mined. So it is something to be aware of that's in the ground. And there's a lot of other factors of how it can get into your home and how it can impact the home. And that's kind of what we want to talk about. That might be kind of hard to see, but basically, actually, I just realized you guys are seeing what I see on this screen, and that's, so I don't know how you have this organized on your laptops or, I'm gonna do it this way. Still trying to figure out the best way to do this in person and live at the same time. Okay, so radon, it comes out of the ground, it breaks down. So if you remember junior high physics, where you would learn about atoms and molecules and how as atoms break down, they have a half-life, they'll break down, they lose some of their components and become other elements. That's basically uranium breaks down to radium to radon. Eventually it turns into lead. But it's that breakdown process that as it moves from uranium to radium to radon, that's where radiation is released, radioactive particles are released, and that's the health hazard that we're talking about. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here. So breathing in, so what it is radon, as it breaks down, it gives off these alpha particles. So small little radioactive particles. They're not very damaging as far as just walking around if there's alpha particles floating around. But as we breathe them in, our lung tissue is a little bit more sensitive. And so it can be more susceptible to the damages that might be caused by those alpha particles. So it is considered a human carcinogen. Associated with the risk of developing lung cancer. In fact, it is the leading cause of lung cancer after smoking. So again, they have lots of parallels, and they draw lots of parallels with smoking because there are similar things. But one thing to keep in mind, and I remember seeing a graphic in one of the trainings I went to with one of the head oncologists up at the University of Utah. And he had kind of a picture graph that said, okay, here's all of your lung cancer cases that are from smoking, and then here's all of your lung cancer cases that were from radon. So yes, it's the second leading cause of lung cancer, but still a majority of those lung cancer cases are a result of smoking. As we'll talk about a little bit later, there is a synergistic effect. So they have now found that if you're exposed to high levels of radon, yes, that can cause lung cancer. If you're smoking a lot, that can cause cancer. But if you're smoking and you have radon, there's this synergistic compounding effect that your likelihood of getting lung cancer increases significantly. There's your first keyword. So if you're online, make sure you write that one down. Okay. So we kind of covered that. So there's low levels of radon everywhere, as I mentioned. Everywhere you're going to run into it. Those low levels are not really a concern. You can't really avoid them. It's when it gets into higher concentrations that we have more of a concern. And that's why we're hearing more and more about radon in the last 20 years than we did prior to that. Growing up as kids, no one, 30 years ago, hardly anyone really ever heard of radon. Now, a lot more people have heard of it. And you think about, well, agents, you guys are in lots of different homes every day. Think of the difference between a 1950s home and a home built in the last 10 years. One of the big things is energy efficiency. Newer homes are more enclosed, more sealed up. They're not as drafty, and that's one of the big contributors is radon gets into our home, and we'll talk about how that happens. But because our homes are so airtight and sealed and energy efficient, the radon tends to accumulate. And that's the issue that we're running into in the last 20 years. If you live in an old drafty house, you're less likely to have problems. I don't hear it as much anymore, but I remember a few years ago, every once in a while, I hear from clients that sometimes heard it from their agents. Oh, no, it's a newer home. You don't have to worry about radon. And in fact, the opposite is true. The newer the home, the more sealed up it is, the more concerns you should have. I don't know if you'll be able to see this in too much detail on the screen and stuff. This is just kind of a tangent because one of the other rumors or one of the other kind of, I don't want to call it a myth, but there's also information and one of the arguments, I guess we'd say, is, well, I've heard that small amounts of radon are actually healthy for you. And where that comes from is there are these therapeutic spas, the radium caves. So there's a few places on Earth where you can go and you can sit in these spas or these areas where there is low levels of radiation, and people go to these spas for health benefits. They get cured of miraculous things, and there's lots of anecdotal evidence that it's therapeutic and it can heal and it's healthy for them. So a lot of people take that, okay, yeah, I went and I stayed at this spa for 2 weeks, and I kind of went and sat in these caves and it cured these issues. And so then people say, well, if that's the case, then having small amounts of radon in my house every day should be the same. And not really. I mean, that's kind of like, well, chemotherapy helped cure my wife of cancer, but doesn't mean I should take chemotherapy every day because that's going to help. No, it doesn't really. It doesn't add up. Anyway, that same mentality has been around for many years. This was in the 1930s. You probably have seen these seltzer bottles that will carbonate water. Back in the 30s, they sold the cartridge that you put in that normally puts carbon dioxide to carbonate. They would actually fill it with radium. So you could carbonate your water with radioactive gas. So just the advertisement here, through the modium of radon bulbs used with the sparklet siphon, radioactive water can be prepared at home. Each bulb contains a fixed amount of the essential radioactive element, which is the source of radon. So the benefit of a radium emanation normally obtained by residents at a spa can now be conveniently and inexpensively procured without interference with the ordinary and routine of daily life. So the idea was, I can make this up and drink this in the morning. Yeah, that's, you're not going to find those anymore. That was actually in one of the radioactive museums, or where they talk about radioactivity and how things have progressed with science as we learn more. So radon is measured in picocuries per liter. So a curie is a measurement of how often an atom is breaking down or giving off radiation. Pico is just a subset of that. So just like millimeter, micrometer, centimeter, pico is just a fraction of that per liter. So not that you need to know that too much, but when you hear that, it's picocuries per liter, abbreviated PCI/L. Average outdoor level is 0.3. You're going to have indoor levels that are higher or lower. Average indoor level is actually around 1.2 to 2.7. So just being indoors is always going to have a higher level, and it's kind of what we talked about. So how does it get into our home? There's lots of ways that it gets in. It's coming out of the ground. It's going to go through foundation cracks, slab cracks, sump pits, or just any opening, anywhere where a gas could get from the ground into your house. You know, go to unfinished basement, find an unfinished basement that doesn't have any cracks, and then go to Vegas because you're really lucky, because that just doesn't happen. Concrete cracks, you have those cracks everywhere, and gas is going to get out. So the radon is coming from the ground into your house. Now, one of the factors that causes it to get drawn into your house is something called the stack effect. Think of a smokestack. That's how that term comes from. As warm air rises, warm air rises and it actually draws in. That's how a chimney works. The chimney gets hot, it draws the smoke up and out of your house. Same thing, warm air rises, and as it rises, it actually creates a negative pressure or a suction in the lower levels of the home. So as the warm air is rising, it's going to draw more radon out of the home. So we often will see more likelihood of radon in a multi-story house versus a rambler on a slab, for example. That depressurization or suction or negative pressure can also occur mechanically through different things that you have in the house. A bathroom exhaust fan, for example, is sucking air out of the house and putting it outside. Your dryer, a central vac, a range hood, and then also air conditioning and furnace ducting that might be in the attic space. It's drawing in air and then putting it back in the house. But if your duct is all leaky and has gaps and stuff, you may be sucking in more than you're putting back in. And so there's lots of mechanical reasons that you could be having a negative pressure in your house. Now, one of the other myths that I hear a lot about is, that I hear from agents or clients is, oh, the house doesn't have a basement, so you know there shouldn't be a radon problem. And that's kind of true. A basement has more likelihood to have a radon problem than a slab. But think of it this way. The radon is coming out of the ground. It's in the dirt. And so the reason it makes sense is because a basement has 5 times more surface area than what a slab does. But it depends on what's underground. You could have a basement, and if there's not a lot of radon in the soil, not a lot's going to get in. Or you could have a house on a slab, and there's lots of radon, and it's going to get into the house either way. So I've had houses on slabs, on crawl spaces, on basements. It's all kind of the same. Now, crawl spaces kind of have a different dynamic. On the one hand, you have a big opening where it's just, there's no concrete or slab, it's just a bunch of dirt. So with that in mind, a house on a crawl space should have more radon problems because it's just wide open. But the thing is that most crawl spaces are vented pretty well. So it tends to get in, but vent out the crawl space before it even gets into the home. So crawl spaces are kind of, could be worse, could be better, just kind of depends on the venting, how much moisture barrier and things that they have in the crawl space. We'll talk about remediation a little bit later. One thing to be aware of with remediation is cost per install, or to take care of a radon problem on a crawl space can be almost double the cost. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Again, just even if you did miraculously have a slab in your basement with no cracks, you still have a big joint around the whole perimeter of the home where the concrete was poured. So everyone's going to have those gaps and openings. Your home is not going to be airtight. One other area, for those of you that work a lot in rural properties on wells, you do also have radon can be carried in water. So and I haven't come across anything, I mean, that was kind of the whole idea with that sparklet. I haven't come across anything that says drinking radon in the water is a problem. It's when that water, the radon is able to aerosolize. So as you're taking a shower, now it gets into the air where you can breathe it. As the water's boiling, as it, just as sitting there, that's how it gets in. So there are cases, so an example would be, we go and we test in the air for radon, but the home is vacant and on a well, and it might test low. People move in, they start using, the plumbing is getting used, and they do another test and it tests really high. Well, it could be coming from the well water source. Okay, and then if you guys have questions too, just type them in the chat. And I see there are a few there, but
think that's just letting you guys know what's going on with the packet and everything. So yeah, if you do have any other questions or anything that come up as we're going, just
plug them into the chat or speak up. Okay, radon levels. What are the different levels that we should be worried about? Because that's the other thing is we'll do a test. We'll say, okay, yep, your house tested 5.5 or 3.2. What do those numbers mean? So average indoor level is 1.2. Typically indoor is going to be about 0.8 to 2.7. The action level is 4.0. And if it's been remediated, you're trying to get it below 2.
So I guess those.
Yeah, you're
Just
the
point
only.
my hand out of the audience here. So my question is, so action level, by that stating action level, that's when you take action as well up to 4, so 3.9, you let it go.
Well, and that's a good question. That's kind of where we're going is there is no legal limit. So some states have requirements when it comes to real estate and things, but in Utah, there's nothing. The action level is where the EPA recommends action. But as we're going to talk about is depending on a person's situation, they may want to take action sooner. And so that's my one caution to you guys as agents is, I guess, be cautious saying, oh, it's 3.9. Yeah, we can't negotiate it. Or if you're on the selling side, oh no, it was 3.9. Everything's negotiable. And that's kind of where your jobs get a little dirty, is trying to figure out all that. The number, the 4.0 is the action level. That after 4.0 or higher, you should take action. But as we're going to talk about, there's a lot of other factors that should be considered. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're a smoker, your risk at a 4 is much higher than someone who's never smoked before. And so you might want to take action if it's a little bit lower. Another thing that plays into these different levels is seasonality and weather conditions. So one of the risks or one of the challenges we have with testing during real estate is we have such a limited time frame. You can get, a 3.8 in one test, and a few days later you could get a 4.2, and that's completely valid and legit. And in general, I would say that wintertime levels are going to be higher than summertime levels. Reasons for that: wintertime, your house is more closed up. You're running your furnace, more warm air is rising. Also, the ground is often frozen or very wet and saturated. Gases on a dry summer day, those gases that are in the ground might come up in your yard and around the foundation. In the wintertime, if the ground is saturated, if it's frozen, then all of that is going to be sucked into your home. So wintertime averages are typically on average are going to be higher than summertime levels. So another thing to consider, the World Health Organization. So here in the US, we often look to the EPA for setting a lot of our health standards. A lot of the rest of the world looks to the World Health Organization. They did a big study. So let me just tell one of the arguments, or another one of those arguments for radon, and is it a big issue? A lot of the data that the EPA used in coming up with the action level and everything was based on a bunch of miners. So there were miners, and they had this control group where they could say, okay, we know exactly how much radon they were exposed to because we have their time clocks. Yep, they worked 40, 50 hours each week, and we know the radon levels in the mine, and they followed them, and 20, 30 years later, where they could see what the health, and that's where a lot of the data came from. So a lot of arguments were, yeah, but that's not, normal lifestyle. A miner's life is a lot harder. There are just lots of other variables. We can't really rely on that data. The World Health Organization, they did a study, and it went on for many years. It finally concluded about 2010. And what they came up with is a new action level that the World Health Organization recommends, and their action level is actually 2.7. So again, is 4, should it be 3.8 or 3.5? Well, the World Health Organization recommends action at 2.7. We're at 4. Another argument I'll often hear is, yeah, 4.0 is too conservative. Canada is actually way higher. So we use picocuries per liter of air. Canada and some countries use what's called a becquerel, just they're basically like a metric unit for measuring radon. And their equivalent used to be about 30 picocuries is what the action level was. So I heard this argument a lot when I first started doing radon, because it was about 12, 13 years ago that they actually changed, and now their action level in Canada is just a little over 4. So now it's equal. It used to be a lot higher, but not anymore. So the EPA does actually encourage you to consider remediation when your levels are between 2 and 4. So here's where we're talking a little bit about smokers versus non-smokers. There is, like I said, a synergistic or compounding effect. So let's talk about this. So these are some charts. And one thing that people always want to know is, well, what's my actual risk? And there's not really an answer for that. It's kind of like, what's my risk if I smoke a cigarette, versus a cigarette a day versus a pack a day versus 2 packs. There's so many variables, especially when it comes to our health, our own immune system, our lifestyle, all of those factors. So what they were able to do is to say, to put some generalization. So they have these charts that say, if you've smoked, and then they have one, if you've never smoked. And then it basically says, if you're exposed for a majority of your life to these levels of radon, what's your risk of getting lung cancer and dying? And so here we go. If you've never smoked, the action level is 4. About 7 people out of 1,000 will die of lung cancer, which is about the risk of dying in a car crash. So most people are comfortable with that. Most people drive to work every day, and I'm accepting of that amount of risk. That's okay. But now you put 4 picocuries at a smoker, and now that's 5 times the risk of dying in a car accident. So that's why that goes back to your question, Connor, of, well, what about 3.9? Well, it kind of depends. If your client's a heavy smoker, they might want to lower that quite a bit by having a radon system put in. So it's relative. Just like some clients are going to be like, oh no, I've got to get that GFCI, or I've got to get that smoke detector put in. I want you to negotiate for that smoke detector. My house has to have a smoke detector. And others are going to be like, yeah, whatever, we'll take care of it. So that's where you guys excel, and that's where you guys can negotiate.
Hey, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm online. This is Dustin Jackson.
Yes.
Can you tell us kind of the process of remediation, like quickly what maybe an average cost is and what they do?
We'll get to that. I've got pictures kind of showing what is done and kind of how it's done and typical costs. So hang tight and we'll get to that part. Yep. Okay, so there's your second keyword. Okay. I think we've covered that. Okay, so just some more information about where we are, and this is some of the sometimes just the arguments or things that we get. And so that's really my goal, is to give you all the information so you can help, because you're going to run into buyers that are really worried about it and want to negotiate getting a system put in. And you're going to have sellers that, they'll go and do their own research and all the reasons why they shouldn't put a system in for their buyers and all. And so I want to give you all the information so you can at least help your clients make those decisions. The EPA put together these zone maps, which is basically they took the data available and they said, what is the risk or the likelihood that this county is going to have a radon problem? Basically, they categorize it as 1, 2, or 3. 1, yes, you're probably going to have a problem. 2, maybe. 3, probably not. So red, orange, yellow. This is what the EPA state map looks like. And so this is what we went off for a lot of years. And so it's kind of like, yeah, Utah's maybe, not so much. The problem was when this map was put together, there wasn't hardly any data for Utah. So about 8 years ago, the state took data. We have a lot more data available. If you ever go, we'll talk about testing here in a minute, but there are, the small little kits, there's just a few labs that process these in the country. But when these labs process that, they collect all that data and they send it to the states. So the states will get this data dump of here's all the zip codes and here's all the levels in the tests that we did. So we have tens of thousands of tests that have been done in Utah, and we're able to put that data together. And so what they did is they recreated this map based on the current accurate data we have. And this is more what the map should look like. And instead of just what the EPA did is if they didn't really know that there wasn't really any data, they just made it orange. When the state redid the map, they said, look, we don't have enough data. We're not going to even color it. We're going to say that we don't have enough data. But what you can see is pretty much, especially in the northern half of the state, we're in that red zone. If you want, you can go to radon.utah.gov. And on the state website, it will have a link there. You can download radon by zip code. And so you can pull up and it will show you the big old spreadsheet that just shows all the data. And so you can look up, 840, like one that I think about is, let's say, pretty much if you look at any one and they have it broken down by county, if you look up any zip code, it will tell you what the total number of tests that have been done, what the average, what the highest level was, and you can get some great information. But what it's told us is that in Utah, on average, 1 in 3 homes is going to test high. So, and especially Salt Lake and Utah counties where most of us are working, it is about 35 to 40% of the homes tested test high. There's another map for radon potential that the Utah Geological Survey did about 20 years ago, where this test is looking at actual data of results. This map was put together based on a bunch of geologists looking at the geological composition, saying what's the potential for radon. And it's pretty accurate, at least from my experience and what we see. And basically what it's saying and what we found is that the benches along the mountains tend to be higher. As far as Utah County that I'm more familiar with, areas where we see, and it's kind of hard to see, I don't know if you can see in this map, but here's the Wasatch Range, the mountains here. Here's American Fork Canyon, Provo Canyon, and there's kind of this, along the benches we'll often see a little bit, but then you see this kind of funnel. If you were to draw from American Fork Canyon to the north end of Utah Lake, kind of that whole corridor, we tend to find high radon. And then some of the highest levels that I've had is around Saratoga Springs. And then as you get over into like Eagle Mountain City Center and some of those areas, and then along the lake as well. And you think about it, we talked about radon travels in water. So if you've got a lot of radon in the mountains, then anywhere in those river bottom areas, we tend to find radon as well. A couple more things. You do want to take care when if you're using that radon zip code. One that comes to mind a lot is Sandy. Sandy has a zip code, I think it's 84090. And that the boundaries for that zip code are kind of a long, skinny east to west area. And so if you look at that data, it says, yeah, only about 20% of those homes tested higher. It was lower than the Utah average. But if you look at that, what that means is down on the valley floor, those homes don't test high very often, but then part of it is up on the bench, and every single one I've tested in that zip code tests high. So you do have to remember that those numbers are averages, and you have a lot of geological differences based on that.
Just trying to understand this. What you're saying is we just live on a planet that's trying to kill us.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Just curious.
So one other thing too, I was teaching this class a while back, and one of the agents said, "Hey, my neighbor has questions about radon. I'm going to have him call you." So he called me and he said, "Yeah, I need you to come test my house because I did a test for myself. My wife saw something on KSL, and so I went and got a test. I did it, and it came back at 16. He's like, that seemed really high. So I went to get another test, and I thought, well, I'm going to get one for my neighbor too and have them check. So I did it again, and it came back at 15, but my neighbors came back at 2. And so he said, so I went again and did a third test and it still came back up in that 15 range. He's like, but my neighbor's is still low. And I thought, okay, well, maybe you have a new house. And, no, they're same houses, same builder. They're, cookie cutter, they're identical houses. So I went and did a test with our equipment. We'll talk about testing next. And sure enough, it still came up in the teens. And what happens, and we do run into this occasionally, and that's why EPA says every home should be tested, is you have other variables. What they've found is that the radon potential in a home is actually whatever's in the soil in the footprint of the home plus about a 4-foot radius. So whatever is in the ground directly underneath you is what's going to impact the radon. And if you think about if you've ever been involved or with drilling water, you can drill a well over here and hit water at 100 feet, and maybe you go 200 yards this way and it's 1,000 feet. Just like water flows through the earth much differently, gases are going to flow through differently. So you have that. The other is it's coming out of the ground. It's in minerals and things. Well, if you have your concrete and it was the gravel and material in that concrete was sourced from an area that maybe had higher radon potential, it could be your actual foundation walls that are, could be causing some of that radiation. So there's a lot of other variables. It could have been backfill that they brought in to fill in the site or to build up the site. So there's a lot of other variables that happen. So just because one neighbor tested low doesn't mean the whole neighborhood is going to be fine. All right, how do you test? Radon tests, they're inexpensive, readily available. Like I said, you can get these from the state for about $10, $15. You have short-term and long-term tests. So long-term test is something that's 90 days or greater. I used to have one of the long-term tests.
While you're doing that, quick question I have for you is cost about an extra $10 to $15 added to you when you're doing your test for you to do it, or what's the cost added to the home inspector?
Okay, let me talk about the different types of tests, and then I'll explain those costs, because there are different types of tests.
To clarify the reason I asked,
yeah,
because it's not really negotiable if the client does it themselves, because then they
realize
how they did it, and that's not negotiable.
Exactly. So yeah, hang tight, because that's one of the points. So short-term tests, so long-term tests, it's the most reliable because we're looking at the average, and temperatures and seasons and all of those things can play into that. So that's really your best test. Obviously, as this started becoming a real estate topic, realtors said, yeah, this doesn't work for us. We need a short-term test. And so that's where the short-term, 48, 72-hour test was born. And think of it more of a screening, but a pretty reliable screening test that's been done for 20 to 30 years. So as far as testing types, you have four main types of tests. You have some sort of absorptive material, usually charcoal. So this kit comes in a little packet. You basically open it up. Has this little foam piece to hold this open, and you just has a little spot here, record when you set it up and then when you finish, and it should take about 72 hours. And you just hang this in your house somewhere. Just leave it in your house 72 hours, then you seal it back up, mail it off, and you have your results in a few days. You also have Alpha Track. Alpha Track are the type that you use for long-term. Remember, it's alpha particles. So it's a little device that has a film inside, and as those alpha particles are floating around in the air, it leaves a mark. And so they're able to track how many alpha particles there are in a certain amount of time. Alpha Track are mainly used for those long-term tests. Electrode is another type of device. We're starting to see a few of them, but not very many people use those. Alexa is talking to me over here. The other one is a continuous monitor. So continuous monitor is what most of your home inspectors are using. It's an electronic device that samples the air on a regular basis. So pros and cons of the different types. That's the electret. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because no one's really using them. It's more of a professional test. I Alpha track, that's what those ones look like. Charcoal test we talked about.
Hey, Jared,
Yep.
can you hear me? It's Minette.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
online. I just wanted to mention, I actually had referred some clients to a website called radonservices.com, and they do free testing. I think they come out and actually set up the test in the home if you're within 50 miles of Draper, but they'll also mail you a free kit too. But
Yep.
make sure it's within the due diligence period, because it does take them some time to get out. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there.
Yep. So in Utah Radon, I think there might be one of the ones that have just started using the ePerm. Be cautious. I know there's a lot, because I think they were one of the first ones to start offering that as a way to kind of get their foot in the door for mitigation systems. There a lot of other mitigation companies have started doing that, and they don't use the right equipment. And yeah, so definitely a way to go that your clients can save some money if you can get it done in time. And but just be cautious of some of the other copycats. I had an agent call me. He had just taken the class and he said, hey, the buyers on my listing just did a radon test, but it doesn't, it doesn't look like anything that you talked about. And so he's like, so my sellers want to pay you to come out and do a real test just to make sure. So sure enough, I went out and there was one of these kits, and it was thrown on the floor in the mechanical room down by the water heater. So just some of the protocols: if it's part of a real estate transaction, you have to do at least 2 of these side by side. They need to be at least 20 inches off the floor, and they can't be in a mechanical room. They need to be in some livable space like a bedroom. So just be cautious, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those protocols here in a second. With but Utah Radon is one that I've worked. They'll show up a lot of times when we're doing the inspection, and as long as they're using the protocols, then they're good. And I'm always happy to review any of those reports or anything that you guys get from those. Let me talk continuous radon monitor. So basically what this device is doing is it's waking up once an hour and it's taking a sample. Pros and cons of the different ones. Charcoal test. Biggest advantage, they are readily available, usually around $10, and they're pretty simple. They've also been around the longest. They've been using these for about 20 years. They're pretty reliable as far as what we're doing. The one disadvantage that I see is, one is due diligence. Usually these you're supposed to run for 72 hours, and then you seal it up and mail it off. And so depending on when you time it, if you mail it off and it's over a weekend, that's going to delay it a little bit. So you're kind of on average looking at about a week to get the results. So that can be a challenge. But the other thing is just the physics of how this works. So there's charcoal in here, and charcoal, as you know, absorbs odors and smells and tastes. And so you set up this device and it absorbs radon. One other myth that I often hear about is we'll test a vacant house and it will be high. And then the seller will say, yeah, but it's vacant. Of course it's high. No one's in there. Technically, the part of the protocol is the home should be sealed up. Closed house conditions is what's required. Because radon, the half-life of radon is only about 2.5 days. So if your home has been sealed for 10 months or for 10 days, won't really make a difference very much on the radon, because any radon from 4 or 5 days ago, its half-life has already started to diminish that significantly. With that in mind, that's one of the challenges with the charcoal, is it absorbs the radon, but if you take a few days to mail it off, it's over a weekend, the test is less accurate as more time goes on, because that radon decays and it's no longer there. And so they can't measure it. So one way they say that is this is biased towards the end. So if you did a 3-day test, it's not a true average, it's biased towards the end of the test, because the radon that was collected at the beginning of the test starts to disappear. So what I tell people, in my opinion on this, is if you do one of these tests and it's below a 3 or it's above a 5, you can go off, yep, it's below a 3. It's probably low. It's above a 5. It's probably going to be high. If it gets into that 3 to 5 range, that's where you start to say, yeah, maybe we better double check it or do it again in a little bit and kind of see how accurate it is. So that's the downside of that one. Downside of continuous radon monitor is the equipment. Obviously, it's more expensive. Really, the main benefit of this equipment is what Connor was bringing up, is if you're planning on using this with a negotiation. So what I tell people, especially with the market right now, is if there's no chance for negotiating, but you really want to know if radon is a problem, you're best to use one of these. They're about $50 to $70. You set them up in the house and you leave them for anywhere from 90 days up to 365 days. And then you send it off. So this is an alpha track. It's a long-term test. And they're going to be your most accurate because, one, it's going to be measuring over different seasons. So I usually tell people, try to let it go for 6-8 months in your house. So it's at least going through 2 or 3 seasons. But it's also going to track their lifestyle and living conditions. Because let's say it's a vacant house or it's a different, grandma and grandpa living there are the sellers, and now you're moving in with your 5 kids. So windows are going to be open, you're going to be doing a lot more laundry, bathroom fans, all those other things that we talked about that can change the dynamics. This is going to give you a more true, what are the levels? So this is your best bet. If you don't want to spend the money, you just want to know for your own benefit, that's your next one. If you're trying to figure this out for a real estate transaction in the short time frames, this is your best one because this one will be negotiable. The other thing is this device, we can set it up, and as long as the conditions are all met, we can pick that up and have results within about 50 hours, so 2 days. So that one does make a little bit, helps in those transactions. These are the continuous monitors. So if you have a professional test being done on your property, you should see one of these. If you see one of these, that would raise some red flags. These are continuous monitors, but these are consumer devices. And there's been a few more that have come out in the last couple of years. I actually have one of these at my house. It's great. This one's been around for a long time, but what's great about these is it's like a carbon monoxide detector. It's constantly measuring and always telling you what the overall long-term average. I moved into a new house a year ago and I got one of these and I put it up in the basement, and wow, after the first few months, it was like 5, 6, and I'm in the same neighborhood that I lived for 20 years, and my other house never tested high, and so I thought it was weird, but over my long-term average is now in the high 2s. So things change dramatically over a long period of time. So these ones run about 130, 150. The downside, and I'm going to get on a little soapbox here, is a lot of people in my profession, because none of this is regulated in the state, it would be really easy for me to spend $150 and go buy 5 or 6 of these and start using these in my inspections, because if I get one of these ones are about $1,800. These ones are about $1,200, about $1,000. So, you can see the cost is significantly different. The other thing is a professional device has to be calibrated every year. So I have 8 of these and 4 of these. And these ones cost me $250 every year to send off to get recalibrated. These are about $220. So there's a huge expense. And so unfortunately, in my profession, I run into a lot where, I'll just jump ahead here. An agent sent me, this was the home inspector's radon report. And I kind of blotched out, this was his business card. But that was the radon report, was a picture of a consumer device showing, oh yeah, your long-term average is 6.4. But if you go to the manufacturer's website and look up these devices, You know, can I use one of these consumer ones? We do not recommend performing home inspections with those devices. So the manufacturer even says that's not what they're made for. This is another one. No, this should not be used as a substitute for performing a professional radon test or for professional applications. They're just not designed with the mechanics and the electronics to be bouncing around in my truck, going from house to house. And there's not a real way to calibrate them. I have seen that you can do some calibration, but a lot of times it's send it in and you're almost basically just buying a new one every year. So again, that's just my soapbox is, you know, I have issue when another inspector is charging the same price for a test and they're not really providing a professional service. So off my soapbox. Oh, there's your third keyword. Okay, so the last benefit of using a continuous monitor is you actually get some data, which can be helpful in a real estate transaction to make sure that there wasn't any tampering or funny, shady business going on, which in my career has happened 3 times. So it does happen, but 3 times in 15 years, that's pretty good. But we can also look at the data and say, hey, is there something maybe external that maybe affected this, like weather patterns or other things like that? So we're getting hour by hour readings. You know, a lot of times people say, oh, but it hit a few times. We're not, it's going all over the place. We're worried about what the average. So in this case, the average was 3. Average 0.7. So these are some other ones. One of the other benefits is most of these continuous professional monitors do have motion sensors. So that's what these red dots are. So if there is any motion, and so I did have one where it was getting high, there was motion, then went really low, then there was motion, then went really high. And the suspicion is, well, they picked it up and set it on the porch, and then put it back before they knew that I was coming to pick it up, or maybe they threw a blanket over the top, so it wasn't really getting an airflow. So those are options. The good news on that one was the average was still like 5, so it was still high. I didn't have to say how high and get into an ethics debate with anyone. Average of 38, you can see. That's pretty high. So this one is an interesting one. This one was up in, and just, I use this one just to point out that you do have some gray area that you need to be aware of. This was up in the mouth of Cottonwood Canyon, Little Cottonwood Canyon. And there had just been a huge rain or snowstorm, but it was springtime. And it was one of those dumps a ton of snow and then it was sunny the next day, so all of it melted. And so we set up, and while we were doing the inspection, there was just water and the ground was all wet and swampy. And by the time I picked it up, you know, the sun was out, things were kind of dried out. Our average was 4.0. And this one I had picked out, it was over a weekend, so it had an extra day that it sat there. If I had picked it up at the 48 hours, it would have been much higher than 4.0. But you can also see that if I had set it up a day later, it would have been below 4. So we've had that a few times where we'll do a test and it's high, and the sellers will say, oh, I want to do a test to confirm, and it comes back low. Who's right? Well, they both could be right. In those cases, the first thing that I usually say is, okay, what device were they using? When was it last calibrated? Was it done professionally? And if it was, then yeah, it's very likely that you could have different readings. This is another one that just went for a longer period of time. You can see how things change. Sometimes we'll see patterns like this. One of the biggest influencer of radon levels is barometric pressure. As barometric pressure drops, radon levels go up. So keep that in mind as storms are coming or going. We will often see a very big correlation. All right, we need to get in. We got about 5 more minutes. Go, protocols. All doors and windows need to be closed. Don't operate any fans that bring in air from the outside. So window AC or swamp cooler cannot be used. The device is placed in the lowest occupiable level of the home. So not in a crawl space, not in a cellar, but in an area that could be lived in. Not in a kitchen or a bathroom or a mechanical room, at least 20 inches off the floor. away from drafts and exterior walls. And by drafts too, you wouldn't want to put it underneath an air register because you're measuring passive air. And if air is constantly blowing on it, that's going to inflate the results. Not in the utility room. Okay, we're gonna go through because we're a little behind. Okay, oh, there's your fourth keyword. So remediation. The good news is that it's fairly reliable to get the radon taken care of. And it's also verifiable. So it's not like mold testing where there's a big gray area of did we get it all? You know, is it taken care of? This is pretty much, okay, we do this, we're done. Check it every few years and make sure that it's still working. Average cost for most homes on a slab or a basement is about $1,200 to $1,500. If you have a crawl space, I would almost double that. So we usually see crawl spaces in the $2,000 to $3,000. The reason is with a crawl space, well, let me just show you how it's working, then it'll make sense. The idea with a radon remediation system, you're reducing the number of paths for radon to get into the house. So if it's an unfinished basement, they'll go around and seal up as many of those gaps as you can. So seal up the gaps, and then you're going to provide an alternate path for that radon to go. So this picture here is a passive system. If you are having a radon system put in as part of a new build, as part of construction, then this is how it will be. And basically they'll put a pipe in under the slab, it'll go up and it'll vent to the outside. And the idea is that as air accumulates under the house, or the gases accumulate under the house, and it's trying to escape to atmosphere, instead of trying to get through the cracks, oh, here's a big 4-inch pipe, I'm just gonna vent out through here. So usually that will be done as part of the building process. You cannot test a house until it is complete. So there's no way of knowing if you're gonna build a house, if it's gonna have a radon problem. There's just no way to do that. So installing the passive system often will solve about 50 to 70% of radon problems. But if it doesn't, then they do what's called an active system, which basically they'll just cut this and they'll put a fan, an inline fan that's sucking 24/7, which then creates a negative pressure that will draw the radon in and vent it out. So the technical term is a sub-slab depressurization system. So there's just another, in some cases, it'll actually be more like a sump pit, but usually what they're doing is they're cutting a 6 or 8 inch hole in the slab. They'll excavate out maybe 2 or 3 5-gallon buckets worth of dirt, just so there's a little pocket down there where the radon can accumulate. And then it's a 4-inch PVC pipe that will get stuck in there and routed to the exterior. Sometimes it will go out and up. Sometimes they'll be able to route it through to hide that. But like I said, average costs, I usually tell people it's about $1,500 is what most clients are reporting back to me. So just to wrap up a few more things on remediation, especially as agents, if you're trying to negotiate radon systems, most of the systems, the thought of how to remediate it is the same. Where you're going to get differences is in a few things. One is in the type of pipe that's used. If it's a Schedule 40 versus Schedule 80. So a thicker PVC pipe is going to carry less sound and it's going to last longer. Also, where they're going to route that and where the fan will be installed. I did a home inspection. It was up on Suncrest, so beautiful views. But when you went out to the patio and you were enjoying those nice big views, the radon fan was running. So that's something to consider. That's one thing I often tell buyers. If you're negotiating and the seller is going to pay for it, you might want to have some input, because usually the easiest is going to be, like I see a finished house, they'll go into one of the the basement bedrooms, and they'll cannibalize one of the closets to put the pipe into the ground, into the slab, and then they'll run it outside and that fan will be going through. So you lose part of your closet, you have a fan that maybe not look as attractive on the outside. versus a little bit more work to put that fan up in the attic space and route those pipes maybe through the garage and an area in the mechanical room. So that would be the only variance as far as if you're shopping for who's going to put in the system, is not just the cost, but actually where's the pipe going to go? What's the type of pipe? The other is, the other comment or thing to be aware of is the fan. The fan is running 24/7, 365. And so it's not a huge electrical drain, but if you can spend an extra $50 and get the energy efficient one that's 100 watts versus the less efficient one that's 200 watts, that just cut your bill in half. So that would be the other factor when you are looking at cost. I think we are about out of time. Bottom line is, I guess the last thing I just want to bring up is that radon sometimes gets this stigma. Oh no, it's got a radon system. And it's starting to change, but I still will hear that occasionally. I just heard it a few weeks ago. Yeah, it's got a radon system, so we're a little worried. To me, that's kind of like, oh, I'm going to buy this new car and it's got twice as many airbags as my old car. That must mean it gets in more crashes. Well, no, it's just, it's safer. It's got more features. And so, don't let having a radon system already installed be a negative. That should definitely be promoted as a positive, because 1 in 3 homes in Utah have high radon and are probably going to need a system. But if it's already got one, then it should be good. I think there's one last keyword. Your last keyword.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
How do you submit the keywords?
I think there will be a link in the chat as soon as we wrap up.
Okay.
I think Tony will post that, and there's a link to a form.
Okay.
Okay. If there are any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me, and we'll get these credits banked here in the next week. And I appreciate you guys hanging out online. And Connor here in person. Hi. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. I submitted the form in the chat. I can resubmit it if you need it again, but I'll wait on here for a bit to make sure everybody gets a chance to fill it out.
Can you resubmit the link for that?
Sure. Just one sec. Should be in there.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Good.